May 17th, 1944, Rechlin-Lärz Airfield, 70 kilometers north of Berlin. Hauptmann Wolfgang Falck's hands trembled as he completed his post-flight report, writing words that would have seemed treasonous if they weren't so obviously true. We have been fighting the future with the past. Every technical advantage we believed we possessed is an illusion. The Americans have won the war in the air, and most of our pilots don't even know it yet. 30 minutes earlier, Falck had climbed down from the cockpit of a captured Grumman F6F Hellcat, aircraft number 58, one of fewer than a dozen American fighters that had fallen intact enough into German hands to permit comprehensive testing. His flight suit was soaked with sweat despite the cool spring air, not from fear or exertion, but from the profound psychological shock of understanding. For 18 minutes at altitude, he had flown an aircraft that rendered everything he knew about aerial combat obsolete. The Messerschmitt 109, the Focke-Wulf 190, the aircraft that had given the Luftwaffe air superiority over Europe, were not just inferior to this American carrier fighter. They were from a different era of aviation entirely. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of how Axis test pilots discovered American air superiority through captured aircraft is one of the most overlooked narratives of the Second World War. It reveals not a single moment of realization, but a cascading series of revelations that shattered the confidence of Germany's and Japan's most experienced aviators. These were not propaganda officers or distant generals making assessments from reports. These were the men who had flown against the RAF over Britain, who had dominated the skies over Russia, who had swept aside Allied opposition in the early war years. When they climbed into captured American fighters, they encountered technology so advanced, so thoroughly engineered, so overwhelmingly superior that it demolished every assumption about American industrial capability and aviation design philosophy. The journey to this revelation had begun years earlier in the scattered wreckage of shot-down American aircraft across multiple theaters of war. Every crashed Wildcat in the Pacific, every downed Thunderbolt in Europe, every captured Lightning in North Africa represented an intelligence opportunity. German and Japanese technical teams descended on crash sites with measuring tools, cameras, and cutting equipment, desperate to understand how American aircraft performed beyond their specifications. What they found in those early examinations should have served as warning, but the evidence was dismissed as anomalies, explained away by desperate rationalizations. The Americans were lucky, their pilots were reckless, their tactics compensated for technical inferiority. These comfortable lies persisted until test pilots actually flew intact, captured aircraft, and discovered that American aviation technology wasn't just competitive, it was dominant. The first significant captures came in the Pacific theater, where the vast distances and naval battles sometimes resulted in relatively intact American aircraft falling into Japanese hands. In October 1942, a damaged F-4F Wildcat made an emergency landing on a beach controlled by Japanese forces in the Aleutian Islands. The pilot was captured, but more importantly, the aircraft was recovered largely intact. Japanese naval engineers transported it to the Yokosuka Naval Air Technical Arsenal, where it would become test aircraft number 473 in their evaluation program. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about American engineering capability. The Wildcat was, by American standards, already obsolescent in 1942, a design from 1937 that was being rapidly replaced by more advanced fighters. Yet, when Japanese test pilots flew it against their frontline Zero fighters, they found an aircraft that possessed qualities Japanese designers had sacrificed in favor of extreme range and maneuverability. The Wildcat was rugged, almost absurdly so. Armor plating protected the pilot from multiple angles. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented the catastrophic fires that claimed so many Japanese pilots. The radio worked reliably at ranges Japanese equipment couldn't match. The gun sight was illuminated and gyro-stabilized. Every control surface, every system, every component spoke of an engineering philosophy that valued pilot survival and operational reliability over theoretical performance maxima. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okamiya, one of Japan's most experienced naval aviators, flew the captured Wildcat in comparative trials against the Zero. His report, discovered in post-war archives, revealed profound unease beneath technical language. The American fighter absorbs battle damage that would destroy 3 Zeros, he wrote. Our pilots achieve victory through superior skill and aircraft maneuverability. But this advantage disappears the moment battle damage occurs. The Wildcat pilot can sustain hits that would kill our pilots instantly. He can return to his carrier, while our pilots must ditch or die. This is not a question of courage. This is industrial philosophy made physical. They build aircraft assuming they will be hit. We build aircraft assuming they will not be. Reality favors their assumption. But the Wildcat was merely the prelude. The aircraft that would truly shatter Axis confidence hadn't yet appeared in significant numbers over the battlefields. In hangars at Grumman Aviation on Long Island, engineers were perfecting a fighter that would prove unbeatable in the hands of trained pilots. The F6F Hellcat represented everything American aviation design philosophy valued: ruggedness, firepower, pilot protection, ease of maintenance, and overwhelming power. When it began appearing over Pacific carriers in late 1943, Japanese pilots initially treated it as simply a more powerful Wildcat. They would learn at terrible cost that it was something far more dangerous. The first intact Hellcat to fall into Axis hands came not from combat, but from mechanical failure. On March 9th, 1944, Ensign Thomas Harrington's F6F-3 suffered catastrophic oil pressure loss during a patrol flight over the Solomon Islands. Rather than ditch in the ocean where the aircraft would be lost, Harrington attempted an emergency landing on what he believed was an Allied-controlled airstrip. Navigation error placed him on a Japanese-held island instead. He survived the landing, but was immediately captured, and far more significantly for history, his Hellcat was seized largely intact by Japanese forces who recognized its intelligence value immediately. The aircraft was carefully disassembled and transported by ship to the Yokosuka arsenal, where Japan's finest aviation engineers began the most comprehensive examination ever conducted on an American fighter. What they found astonished them. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, more than any Japanese engine in production or even advanced development. The engine was not a handcrafted precision instrument, but a mass-produced unit built to tolerances Japanese industry couldn't consistently achieve, even in limited production. Quality control documentation found in the aircraft indicated this engine was one of 34 produced that day at the Pratt & Whitney East Hartford plant. 34 engines in a single day, each producing power that Japanese manufacturers struggled to achieve in engines requiring weeks of careful assembly. The airframe itself revealed design principles the Japanese engineers found almost alien. Whereas Japanese fighters minimized weight through careful engineering and light construction, the Hellcat simply accepted weight as the price of protection and power. Armor plating surrounded the cockpit in a semicircle. The main fuel tanks were self-sealing, incorporating multiple layers of rubber that would swell and seal when penetrated by projectiles. The canopy was thick plexiglass that could stop small arms fire. Every system had redundancy, backup hydraulics, backup electrical systems, backup fuel pumps. The aircraft was designed to keep flying, even with multiple systems damaged. Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most brilliant naval aviation tacticians and a planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, observed the disassembly process. His private notes, discovered decades later, revealed a man confronting the implications of industrial disparity. This aircraft represents a design philosophy we cannot match, he wrote. They have designed for the reality of combat, accepting that aircraft will be damaged. Pilots will make mistakes. Maintenance will occur in less than ideal conditions. Every American aircraft is built assuming it will be operated by average pilots in difficult circumstances. Our aircraft require exceptional pilots operating in optimal conditions. We have designed for the war we wish to fight. They have designed for the war that actually exists. Japanese test pilots began flying the captured Hellcat in May 1944. The first pilot to fly it was Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace with over 60 confirmed victories. Sakai was chosen specifically because his experience and skill would provide the most accurate assessment. His post-flight report was brief and devastating. This aircraft would defeat the Zero in combat, flown by a pilot with 1/4 my experience, he stated. It is faster at all altitudes, climbs better above 4,000 meters, dives far faster, and can sustain battle damage that would destroy 10 Zeros. Our advantage in maneuverability means nothing if we cannot force engagement, and this aircraft's speed ensures American pilots can always choose whether to fight or disengage. We have been winning battles through pilot skill while losing the technical war completely. The armament particularly impressed and disturbed Japanese observers. 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, each with 400 rounds of ammunition, provided devastating firepower. Japanese fighters typically mounted 2 20mm cannons with 60 rounds each and 2 7.7mm machine guns. The Hellcat's 650s could pour out over 5,000 rounds per minute combined, and the ammunition capacity allowed sustained firing that Japanese pilots could only dream of. More critically, the American guns were reliable. Japanese 20mm cannons frequently jammed, their ammunition was inconsistent, and their rate of fire was limited by mechanical complexity. The Hellcat's guns worked consistently, reliably, in every attitude and G-load condition. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. While Japanese engineers examined their captured Hellcat in the Pacific, a parallel revelation was unfolding in Germany. The Luftwaffe's Erprobungsstelle Rechlin, the primary German aircraft testing center, had been collecting fragments of American aviation technology since 1942. Crashed Thunderbolts, downed Lightnings, and captured Mustangs all passed through Rechlin for evaluation. But intact aircraft were rare, and comprehensive testing was impossible with damaged airframes. That changed in April 1944 when a P-47 Thunderbolt made an emergency landing in occupied France with minimal damage. The pilot attempted to destroy the aircraft, but was prevented by rapidly arriving German forces. The Thunderbolt was transported to Rechlin, where it would provide German test pilots with their first opportunity to fully evaluate American fighter performance. Hauptmann Heinz Baer, a Luftwaffe ace with over 200 victories, was selected to conduct the initial evaluation flights. Baer was not a man prone to exaggeration or panic. His combat record spoke of exceptional skill and cool assessment under pressure. His first flight in the Thunderbolt lasted 27 minutes and concluded with him requesting an immediate meeting with Luftwaffe Technical Command. The report he filed that evening would circulate through German aviation circles, generating responses ranging from disbelief to despair among those who understood its implications. The Thunderbolt represents American aviation philosophy taken to its logical extreme. Baer wrote, "It is not a fighter aircraft as we understand the term. It is a flying fortress designed to destroy anything in the sky while protecting its pilot from all but the most catastrophic damage." The R2800 engine produces more power than any German engine currently flying. This alone would make it formidable. But the Americans have used this power not for maximum performance, but for overwhelming capability across all conditions. He continued with specifics that made uncomfortable reading for Luftwaffe command. At 6,000 meters altitude, the Thunderbolt is faster than the Focke-Wulf 190. At 8,000 meters, it is faster than any German fighter. In a dive, it will exceed 800 kilometers per hour, a speed at which most German fighters experience control, surface flutter, or structural failure. The American aircraft simply accelerates smoothly past speeds we considered theoretical maximums. But Baer's report reserved its most damning observations for the Thunderbolt's construction and systems. "The aircraft is built like a locomotive," he noted. "Every component is overbuilt, over-engineered, designed for reliability rather than minimum weight. The engine cowling alone weighs more than some German fighter subsystems. Yet, this weight is not waste. It is protection. The pilot sits behind armor plating that would stop our 20mm cannon rounds. The fuel tanks are self-sealing. The oil system has redundancy. The radios work at ranges our equipment cannot match. Every switch, every control, every instrument is large, simple, designed to be operated by old, poor hands in combat conditions." German engineers who examined the Thunderbolt found details that revealed the vast industrial capacity behind American aviation production. The engine cylinders were individually replaceable, allowing field maintenance that would require complete engine replacement in German aircraft. The propeller was constant speed, automatically adjusting blade pitch for optimal performance, a technology Germany had developed but couldn't produce in sufficient quantities. The turbocharger, enabling high-altitude performance, was a mechanical masterpiece of precision engineering that German factories struggled to replicate. Most tellingly, inspection stamps throughout the aircraft indicated it had been assembled in just 14 days from component delivery to final inspection. German fighters required weeks or months of careful construction. The full implications of American technological superiority became undeniable when the Rechlin Test Center received a captured F6F Hellcat in May 1944. This aircraft, forced down over France after sustaining flak damage that would have destroyed any German fighter, landed with one engine cylinder completely destroyed, 37 holes in the fuselage and wings, and hydraulic fluid streaming from severed lines. Yet it had flown 120 kilometers to reach German-controlled territory before the pilot executed a controlled belly landing. The aircraft was damaged but recoverable, and more importantly, it provided German engineers with their first look at the fighter that was destroying Japanese aviation in the Pacific. Hauptmann Wolfgang Falck, recalled from night fighter duties specifically for his analytical skills and engineering background, conducted the first comprehensive evaluation. Unlike the Thunderbolt, which was designed for European theater high-altitude combat, the Hellcat represented American carrier aviation philosophy. Falck's first flight, the one that had left him shaken, revealed an aircraft that combined the Thunderbolt's ruggedness with superior maneuverability and carrier-specific design features that German aviation had never seriously considered. His complete technical report ran to 47 pages, but his verbal summary to assembled Luftwaffe command staff was brutally concise. "Gentlemen, we are fighting an enemy whose worst fears about combat have produced better aircraft than our highest aspirations. They have designed every system assuming the pilot will be wounded. The aircraft will be damaged. The mission will go wrong. This euphemism has created machines that are nearly indestructible. The Hellcat systems revealed a level of engineering integration that German designers found remarkable. The hydraulic system operated flight controls, landing gear, flaps, and weapons bay doors through a single pump with multiple backups. If hydraulic pressure failed, mechanical cables allowed manual operation of critical systems. The electrical system ran on a 24-volt generator with battery backup, providing power far exceeding what German fighters carried. This electricity powered not just instruments and radios, but electrically heated flight suits, gun heating systems that prevented jamming at altitude, and cockpit lighting sophisticated enough for instrument flight in conditions that would ground Luftwaffe fighters. But the revelation that most disturbed German test pilots was the Hellcat's handling characteristics. Major Heinz Knoke, who flew the captured Hellcat in comparative trials against the Focke-Wulf 198, filed a report that circulated through fighter wings with devastating effect on morale. The American aircraft is faster at all combat altitudes, he wrote. It accelerates better. It maintains energy in turns. It can absorb battle damage we cannot imagine surviving. Most critically, it is easy to fly. A pilot with 50 hours could operate this aircraft competently. Our fighters require 150 hours of training to achieve basic proficiency. The Americans have engineered pilot skill into the aircraft itself. They have made the average pilot dangerous and the skilled pilot nearly invincible. This observation touched on a reality that Luftwaffe commanders were already confronting through bitter experience over Germany. American fighter pilots weren't necessarily more skilled individually than German veterans, but their aircraft compensated for skill differences to a degree that made comparative pilot quality nearly irrelevant. A mediocre American pilot in a Thunderbolt or Mustang could survive encounters that would kill excellent German pilots in Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. The American philosophy of building extremely capable machines flown by adequately trained pilots was defeating the German approach of building adequate machines flown by extensively trained pilots. In a war of attrition, the American model was sustainable. The German model was not. Japanese test pilots reached identical conclusions through parallel testing in the Pacific. By summer 1944, the Yokosuka arsenal had accumulated not just the captured Hellcat, but also a downed Corsair and several Mustangs that had force-landed in China and been transported by Japanese occupation forces. Each aircraft confirmed and expanded the disturbing pattern. American fighters were simply better, not marginally, but comprehensively. They were faster, tougher, better armed, easier to maintain, and designed with a sophistication that Japanese industry couldn't replicate even if given complete plans. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, after extensive testing of multiple American types, wrote a confidential assessment for Imperial Navy Command that amounted to a plea for realistic strategy adjustment. "We cannot win an attrition war against American aviation," he stated bluntly. "Their aircraft are superior in every measurable category except maneuverability, and that single advantage is negated by their speed and ability to disengage at will. More critically, they are producing these aircraft in quantities that make our production look insignificant." The captured Hellcat bears manufacturing stamp indicating it is aircraft number 4793. This single type from one manufacturer has been produced in greater numbers than all Japanese fighters combined in 1943. The manufacturing evidence found in captured aircraft proved as demoralizing as the performance figures. American aircraft carried detailed production logs, maintenance schedules, and manufacturing documentation that revealed industrial processes Japanese engineers found almost incomprehensible. The Hellcat Falck flew at Rechlin, bore stamps indicating involvement of 137 subcontractors across 42 states. Components were manufactured to such precise tolerances that they were fully interchangeable. Any Hellcat engine could be installed in any Hellcat airframe without modification. Propellers, control surfaces, landing gear, all were standardized across thousands of aircraft. This level of industrial organization and precision manufacturing was beyond Japanese or German capability. German test pilot Werner Mulders, younger brother of the famous Ace Werner Mulders, who had died in 1941, flew comparative missions against captured American aircraft throughout summer 1944. His classified report to Luftwaffe Operations Command painted a picture of inevitable defeat. "The Americans have industrialized air combat," he wrote. "They have removed as many variables as possible through standardization and engineering excellence. Their pilots receive fewer training hours, but fly aircraft that compensate through superior systems. Their maintenance requires less skill because components are interchangeable and systems are accessible. Their tactics can be simpler because aircraft performance allows multiple approaches to any situation. We have created an air force that requires everything to go right. They have created an air force that functions when everything goes wrong." The psychological impact of these discoveries rippled through Axis air forces in ways that affected combat operations long before the information reached most frontline pilots. Test pilots who had flown American aircraft returned to their units changed men, their confidence shattered by first-hand knowledge of technological inferiority. They flew combat missions knowing that enemy aircraft were fundamentally superior, that survival depended on luck and enemy pilot error rather than their own skill or aircraft capability. This knowledge created a fatalism that spread through squadrons like disease. Pilots who had once attacked with confidence now hesitated, their aggression tempered by understanding that their aircraft were outmatched. Major Erich Hartmann, Germany's leading ace with 352 confirmed victories, never flew a captured American fighter, but received detailed briefings from test pilots who had. His tactical approach evolved to reflect this knowledge. He abandoned traditional dogfighting tactics in favor of hit-and-run attacks that maximized the limited advantages German fighters retained. His famous dictum, decide attack break, reflected an understanding that German fighters could not afford extended engagements with American aircraft. Victory required perfect execution of brief attacks followed by immediate disengagement. Any mistake, any extended combat favored the Americans and their superior machines. In the Pacific, Japanese fighter tactics underwent similar transformation driven by bitter experience and confirmed by technical intelligence. The aggressive, turning dogfights that had characterized early war combat gave way to defensive formations and slashing attacks. Japanese pilots learned to exploit the Zero's superior maneuverability in brief encounters while avoiding any situation where American aircraft could use their speed, armor, and firepower advantages. But these tactical adaptations were desperate measures against overwhelming odds. They could delay defeat, not prevent it. The human cost of this technological disparity manifested in the steadily climbing loss rates that characterized Axis air forces from mid-1944 onward. German pilots who had survived years of combat found themselves shot down by American pilots with a fraction of their experience simply because the Americans flew better aircraft. The irony was bitter and inescapable. Skill mattered less than engineering. Courage couldn't overcome horsepower. Determination couldn't defeat armor plate. The Axis powers had entered the war believing in the primacy of human factors, pilot skill, and warrior spirit. They discovered that industrial capacity and engineering excellence were the true determinants of victory. The final months of 1944 brought increasing desperation to Axis aviation testing programs. German engineers examined every captured American aircraft with frantic attention, seeking some weakness, some flaw that could be exploited. They found none that mattered operationally. Yes, American aircraft were heavier and consumed more fuel, but they also had the fuel to consume and the carriers or bases to operate from. Yes, American aircraft were less maneuverable than specialized German or Japanese fighters, but their speed allowed them to dictate engagement terms, making superior maneuverability irrelevant. Every German or Japanese advantage came with crippling disadvantages. Every American advantage seemed to come with minimal trade-offs. By early 1945, the testing programs had largely ceased. There were few captured American aircraft to examine because American pilots flying superior machines were rarely shot down. More critically, there was no point in further testing. The conclusions were inescapable and unchangeable. American aircraft were better. They were produced in overwhelming numbers, and there was nothing German or Japanese industry could do to match them. The technological war was over, even as the shooting war ground toward its inevitable conclusion. The test pilots who had flown captured American aircraft faced the war's end with complex emotions. They had known defeat was coming long before frontline troops. Some felt vindication, their technical assessments validated by events. Others felt profound bitterness at leaders who had committed their nations to wars that industrial reality made unwinnable. Most felt simple relief at having survived to see peace, having flown missions they knew were hopeless because orders and duty required it. Wolfgang Falck survived the war and became a prominent figure in post-war German aviation, helping rebuild the Luftwaffe as part of NATO. In interviews decades later, he spoke candidly about the profound impact of flying captured American aircraft. "We knew we had lost when we saw what they had built," he stated in a 1983 interview. "Not because we lacked courage or skill, but because we lacked the industrial capacity and engineering sophistication to compete." Flying the Hellcat was like traveling to the future. Everything we had struggled to achieve, they had already surpassed. It was humbling and terrifying. I flew combat missions for another year after that test flight, and every time I climbed into a German fighter, I was aware that I was flying an inferior machine. That knowledge changes you. It makes every mission feel like gambling with loaded dice. Saburo Sakai also survived the war despite being one of Japan's most hunted pilots. He flew his last mission in August 1945, still in a Zero, still outmatched by American aircraft that were technically superior in every way except the maneuverability that no longer mattered. In his post-war memoirs, he reflected on the disconnect between pilot-level knowledge and high command decision-making. "We knew we could not win," he wrote. "Every experienced pilot knew. We had flown against them. We had examined their captured aircraft. We understood the disparity. But we continued fighting because orders required it, because honor demanded it, because our culture could not accept surrender." I lost countless friends in those final months, men who died knowing their sacrifice would change nothing. That is the true tragedy of technological inferiority in war. It transforms courage into waste. The broader lesson that emerged from the Axis testing programs was one that would influence military aviation doctrine for the remainder of the 20th century. Aircraft performance mattered more than pilot skill in determining combat outcomes. This reality, demonstrated so conclusively in World War II, drove post-war aviation development toward ever more capable aircraft, even as training programs struggled to produce adequately skilled pilots. The American philosophy of engineering capability into the aircraft itself, of designing for the average pilot rather than the exceptional one, became the dominant approach worldwide. Modern fighter aircraft are direct descendants of the Hellcat and Thunderbolt, machines that make adequate pilots good and good pilots exceptional through superior systems and performance. For the German and Japanese test pilots who flew captured American aircraft, the experience became a defining moment that shaped their entire understanding of the war. They had been given privileged access to the enemy's true capabilities, and that knowledge was both enlightening and damning. They understood, earlier than most, that their nations had challenged powers with industrial capacities that made victory impossible. They flew missions carrying this knowledge, fighting battles they knew were lost, watching friends die in aircraft they knew were inferior. The psychological burden of this awareness was perhaps the heaviest weight they carried. The story of Axis test pilots discovering American air superiority through captured aircraft is ultimately a story about the intersection of technology, industrial capacity, and military outcomes. It demonstrates that wars are not won by courage alone, or skill alone, or determination alone. They are won by nations that can produce the tools of war in superior quality and overwhelming quantity. The German and Japanese pilots who flew American fighters learned this lesson directly and personally. They climbed into cockpits that represented everything their own nations could not build, flew aircraft that demonstrated technological superiority their own industries could not match, and returned to their own inferior machines, knowing that every subsequent mission was an exercise in professional obligation rather than realistic pursuit of victory. The captured Hellcat that Wolfgang Falck flew in May 1944 was eventually destroyed in an Allied bombing raid on Rechlin in October of that year. The Thunderbolt tested by Heinz Baer was captured by advancing Soviet forces and disappeared into Russian test programs. The Hellcat, examined by Saburo Sakai, was burned by retreating Japanese forces as to prevent its recapture by advancing American troops. The physical aircraft are gone, but their impact on the men who flew them lasted lifetimes. Those pilots carried to their graves the knowledge of what they had experienced, the moment when they understood that their side had already lost the technological war that would determine the outcome of the shooting war. Their testimony, preserved in reports, memoirs, and interviews, stands as evidence of a profound truth about modern warfare. In conflicts between industrial powers, the nation that builds better tools will prevail over the nation that simply produces braver warriors. The test pilots learned this truth in the most direct way possible by flying the enemy's superior machines and understanding intimately and inescapably that courage could not overcome engineering excellence, that skill could not defeat industrial capacity, and that determination could not change the mathematics of technological superiority. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.